Hi everyone, just a as quick as I can make it review of source usage conventions. So this is an MLA style and specifically focused on how to incorporate quotations, paraphrases, summaries correctly into your argument. So just as a reminder of why we bother with this and why we want to make sure we're doing it correctly, it really is really related to ethos, pathos, and logos. So it does a lot to establish your ethos. It shows that you've done your research, that you can follow the conventions of the academic field in citing that research correctly. It shows your trustworthiness. It shows that you're not being sloppy with other people's ideas. But of course, also documenting sources help us establish logos, because a lot of our sources are going to be logical types of evidence, data, and things like that. And of course, some sources help us establish pathos as well. I do ask that you include at least one example from a real life human, someone's name, someone's specific experience related to your topic. And so citing a source like that can help you establish pathos as well. So it's very important that we learn to document sources correctly in our composition classes, because we will be doing this throughout our academic careers. I also want to provide a reminder for you of what needs to be cited. So remember, words, other people's words, word for word. Phrases, of course, need to be cited in quotation marks, but please remember too that if it's an idea that someone else came up with that you read in a source, you also need to cite other people's ideas. You don't want to make it seem like you're taking credit for coming up with that idea yourself. That's what makes it academic dishonesty. So this is a really handy, very simple flow chart to help you determine whether you need to cite it. So of course you can pause here or come back to this when I post the review. So one thing I'm noticing as I'm looking through some of the submission drafts already is dropped quotations. So we always want to make sure when we're incorporating quotations that we avoid dropped quotations. A dropped quotation is happening here because the sentence begins with a quote. Remember, a quote is a defenseless animal. It needs support on both sides. It can never stand for itself. So this introduces the idea, but within a separate sentence. What we need here then is a signal phrase. So we could do something like Smith argues, comma, or he explains, comma. What you don't want to do also is just add a comma, because this is a sentence. Unsurprisingly, most cats prefer fish tacos. That's actually a sentence. So grammatically, that should be a period, which means essentially you do still have a dropped quotation. And you have a grammatical incorrectness here with the comma attaching to complete sentences. So to fix a dropped quotation, we just use a signal phrase. Here's one that provides a little bit, not just the author's name, but a little bit of context as well. Remember, we worked in class about a basic signal phrase is just the author says, comma, quote. But to go beyond that, we always want to introduce our sources too the first time we use them. So a little bit of summary of the source. You might include the title of the source, some information about the author. So here's a really nice signal phrase that includes some contextual information as well. Yusef Smith, the author of According to Kat, suggests, comma. This is not, if you were to end it here, it would not be a complete sentence, which is what makes it an introductory phrase. It's a phrase, not a sentence, that leads into, with a comma, the quotation. And then, of course, notice the citation on the end. In my drafts that I'm reading so far too, I'm noticing a lack of the citation on the end. So make sure if it's a paginated source and you haven't already used the author's last name, you do need that citation at the end. I also want to remind you again to sandwich all of your quotations. So beyond just a signal phrase, you want to introduce the source a bit. The first time you pull in any source in your paper, you want to say a little bit about the source. So a sentence to summarize the overall source, a phrase added into your signal phrase. So introduce your source and the idea that your source is helping you prove as well. So you always come first with introduction of your idea, tell us about the source, and then you give your quotation or your fact, your paraphrase. And then, of course, on the end as well, you never let a quote speak for itself, because quotes can't speak for themselves. That's your job as the writer. It's your job as the host of the dinner party, is to analyze the quote for your readers, interpret the quote for your readers, and tell how it supports or adds to the ideas that you're trying to get across in your paper. So here are some examples of signal phrases. Here's the according to, a pretty basic one. Jerome Skolnick argues, or says, or claims. And then this is the correct page number. The previous slide was wrong. I missed that one. Switched editions of the textbook. But here, this is correct. In Practical Argument, your textbook, page 322 to 323, 322 to 323 is what that should say. It has this template for identifying tags, so you can literally sort of mix and match this to help you build those signal phrases so that you're not using the same one over and over again. You can also embed the quote. I'm down here on the bottom in green. Embed it into your own sentence already. So this one doesn't have a direct signal phrase, but the quote is just a small phrase. So we don't need cats gravitate toward fish tacos. We're just using this last phrase because of their delightfully fishy taste. So we can embed that phrase into our own sentence. And that's a way to break up the signal phrase overuse as well if you want to incorporate it smoothly. Just be really sure those quotation marks help your readers see where their phrase begins and where your writing ends. And that's what we call source boundaries, and it's really important. Parenthetical references as well. We know that the author's last name and the page number goes in parentheses, but there's all these special cases. What do I do if the work has two authors, if it has no author, if I've already used the author's name? So I want to remind you that Practical Argument, page 329 to 330, lists all those special cases and tells you what to do. A quote of a quote, or what we call an indirect quotation, is in there, and that's come up in a few drafts as well. Then remember, we talked about this in the claim evidence reasoning lesson that occurred last week. So don't forget, after you pull in your quotation, it's your job to speak for that quotation. So not just summarize what the quote said, which you may need to do if it's sort of a complex quote, but beyond summary, you need to analyze that evidence. You need to explain why that evidence is important. You need to interpret that evidence for the reader. You need to explain why that evidence should be emotionally impactful to your audience. So explain the significance of the evidence and how it supports your argument. I've pulled this slide from an online source from another college's writing center that can help you think about how to do that reasoning step. And of course, you may want to review the claim evidence reasoning lessons from before. So again, remember, anytime you pull in a quotation or a paraphrase of a source, you introduce the idea that it supports, you introduce the source, then you pull in the quotation. Don't just drop it in, use a signal phrase or embed it, and then after it, you come in and explain. So that's my super fast review. This is really, really important. It's a skill that you should be demonstrating in this final paper. And so it's going to be an important skill for your grade and for, your achievement in the course, is to demonstrate that you can incorporate sources correctly and smoothly to help support your argument and support your ethos as an academic writer and as a scholar. So please, of course, email me with any questions you have. And if you're still struggling with this might be one of the questions that you want to ask on your tutorial draft. How am I doing on source integration? Where can I improve my source integration? Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and thank you.